Hello everyone, this is Ekaterina and I'm in my third week of studies to become a counselor. Today I would like to reflect in this video on the study material from the last lesson and also just share some of my personal feelings about how it's going. So today there will be two main topics that I would like to discuss. First of all, I would want to tell you about the counseling contracts. So I think this is something that not everyone is aware of, but generally when a person goes to the counselor for the first time, they will be presented with a small contract that they need to read and sign. And I would just like to tell you what to expect in this contract, why you shouldn't be afraid of this contract, and yes, just tell you more about this and why it's necessary. And in the second half of the video, I would like to brainstorm about what a perfect counseling room would look like. So obviously you need to feel comfortable in this room, and whether you are actually planning to set up a counseling practice or you're going to your very first counseling session and you don't know what to expect, what you will see. I hope again this information will be useful and interesting and maybe also break some of the stereotypes that I think we've built up from all the movies. So let's start. So, counseling contract. I think when people hear contract, they think, oh my God, this sounds complicated. I mean, this is nothing like a Microsoft terms and conditions document that I believe they say will take over 1 hour to read in whole. You know, something that we click accept without ever reading. This is one of the documents that I do highly recommend clients to read before signing, because it really is the basics for a good relationship with the counselor. Now, this contract does have quite a bit of administrative feel, I would say, but I think there's a lot of good information as well for the client if they've never done counseling before. And also, just so that you know, a counseling contract is something that we are taught about during the course. All the counselors are highly encouraged to have them, but as far as I know from some of the comments I heard from my fellow students who've done counseling, they've never heard about counseling contracts before they started the studies. So yes, to some of them it was a complete surprise that there is a contract. But generally, what is this contract? First of all, don't be scared. It is usually a very simple 1-2 page document, but it is there to really clarify how the counseling sessions will take place. So like I said, there is a bit of an administrative part where maybe the contract will clarify how do you book the sessions, who is going to pay for the sessions, and how much will they cost. So if you're doing counseling through NHS or an insurance provider, you might already have some sessions secured, so maybe 10 sessions that you're not paying for, but afterwards if you want to proceed you might need to start paying. Or maybe it will explain also how to get more sessions if you need them. It was obviously will have the name of the client and the counselor. It might have a bit information about the style of counseling you are about to receive. And yeah, there will be also obviously information about things like cancellation policy. You know, what if you're not feeling too well and you need to cancel a session? What do you need to do? Generally, counselors actually ask for about 24-hour notice before your next session if you want to cancel it. But I think as you build that relationship with the counselor, they might allow you to cancel on a shorter basis if you have a good reason. Now, apart from that, the contract also covers the topic of confidentiality. Obviously, this is really, really important with counseling, because I also remember myself when I was considering counseling, one of the fears I had is, what if this information that I'll discuss with the counselor will become public or somehow visible to people I work with or my friends? And it is quite scary, and I think this is one of the things that discourages a lot of people from counseling. Well, the contract clearly defines how your information will be stored and if it will be stored in what format. So maybe the counselor needs to take some notes, or maybe there will be some recordings. It will define if your information will be ever shared with anyone and that you will be notified in advance about this. It will also explain situations when the counselor might need to breach the confidentiality clause. And this doesn't happen often, but they do have the so-called duty of care. So if a counselor hears that the client is really emotionally unstable, if they're considering suicide, or for example they're considering harming somebody else, especially children, then the counselor will need to report this concern through the appropriate channels to the correct authorities in order for them to maybe take some actions. So yes, there are some situations when the counselor might need to share your information, but in majority of the cases you will be informed about it well in advance. And obviously also consider situations where maybe court will require the counselor to share notes from your sessions. This is also possible. So I think it's really good to know where you stand before you start counseling. And again, this is my personal experience. I'm a really organized person. I really like to have things written down, organized on a paper. I like my spreadsheets. So I think when I started counseling and I received that contract, it actually put me sort of at peace, because I knew that this was regulated and that the counselor was signing this contract together with me. So it gave me a bit more sense of security that my information will not be just disclosed without me knowing this. And yeah, it just made it feel more professional. So certainly if you've started counseling recently or you're about to start counseling, you just need to be aware that there is such thing as the contract. It's nothing scary. It's there to protect you. And obviously if you're already doing counseling but you've never seen the contract, maybe you should ask about it. Now, even though there will be a contract, it doesn't mean that all the rules are only written down. Some rules might be just discussed verbally between the client and the patient. So, for example, there is usually no gift policy. So even though some clients might actually do counseling for a number of years, if not decades, generally the counselor is still a counselor and not your friend. So obviously they are there to support you, but I think it's still important to maintain that boundary of the professional and the client. So hence generally they ask patients not to give them any gifts. So no Christmas cards, no birthday gifts. And this is usually discussed verbally, so they will not disclose in the contract generally. Also, the counselor might discuss with the client the fact that if they ever meet outside the counseling sessions, that the counselor will never approach the client, because you might be with your family, you might be next to your friend, and that person is unaware of you doing counseling. So we are encouraged to approach the client if they don't see that the client wants to be approached. So I hope now it's a bit more clear as to what this counseling contract is all about. As I said, it's nothing scary, but I think you do need to be aware about this sort of document that you'll be asked to sign, so that it doesn't come as a surprise, and obviously that it doesn't scare you, because as I said, it's just standard procedure and it's there to protect you. And now let's talk about the counselor's room. I think this is where people's opinion about what sort of room you will be having the counseling in can differ, because I think we've been affected quite severely by what we see in the movies. And initially when I thought about counseling, I really imagined this dimmed lit room, the counselor sitting in the corner, there's this sort of lying bed sofa that I'll be lying on, closing my eyes and thinking about my childhood. Well, nothing like that happened. Maybe this is more of a therapy environment, but it was definitely not the counseling environment. And in our lesson, our teacher asked the group to just brainstorm what is an ideal room for counseling. And we got quite some really nice ideas. Obviously, some of the fellow students have done counseling as well. And I think they were also sharing their own experience. And I'm quite certain there was a bit of also influence from all the movies we have watched. But nonetheless, what can you expect? Well, generally it needs to be quite a nice, I would say, minimalistic space. It's not really good when it's overly cluttered. You're not going to see motivational phrases on the walls or pictures of happy people and families and puppies. No, it's generally a very simple room with minimum furniture, ideally. It should have a window in the perfect world with some blinds to ensure that if this office is located on a busy road, that you can close the blinds and the client feels like people can just stare into the window. Also, depending on the client, we might need to reduce the amount of sunlight in the room. Some people prefer it to be a bit darker, some really like the natural light. So as you can imagine, the sitting position of the counselor and the client is probably one of the most important aspects of arranging the counseling room. In the ideal world, both the counselor and the client will have some comfortable seats, maybe on armchairs, maybe small sofas, and sometimes clients might even have some cushions on that sofa, so that if they're sharing something really emotional, they can maybe hug that cushion. It is comforting to some people to just feel like they have something in their hands, like they're hugging something. But most importantly, you will notice that the sitting area of the client and the counselor will never be completely opposite one another. So you will never stare directly at the face of your counselor, because the client and the counselor will sit under a slight angle, and this will allow the client to actually feel more relaxed. Because in the moments when maybe they need to gather some thoughts and they just want to just have that moment of quietness, they don't need to feel constantly that they're being stared at directly, and it also allows them to maybe look around the room without always facing the counselor. So this is something I found really interesting when it was explained to us during the class, and it certainly also reminded me that I've probably didn't have the best counseling environment when I did my sessions. Those were usually carried out in hospital rooms or community center rooms, and yes, I think I was more or less always looking at my counselor. I wasn't as affected by it, but maybe other patients would be. So it's always good if you're doing counseling and you're not feeling comfortable with your sitting position, again, be honest with your counselor and maybe suggest yourself that you change slightly where you sit or how you face one another. So another thing about the sitting position as well is that in lots of movies they show this little coffee table in between the counselor and the client with some tissues on it, The patients might cry, here are the tissues. But actually, we've been told that we shouldn't place that barrier between ourselves and the client, because even though it's just a small table, it might actually feel like we are separating ourselves from the client. So by not having it, you're actually creating more unity. You are kind of telling the client, we're in this together, I am close next to you. And actually, from my experience, when I did the counseling, I would say all the rooms I've ever been in, they always had some sort of table in between me and the counselor. And I think at the time I was not really much bothered by it. I just accepted it as a norm. But thinking about it now, I do wonder if it would have felt much better if we didn't have that barrier in between us. I mean, I still had an amazing counselor, but yes, I think in the ideal world, it would have been nice to have slightly a different room. With regards to time management, this is completely in the hands of the counselor. So generally, if there will be any clocks located in the room, they will be positioned in a way that the client will not see them. It's going to be only the counselor who will see them. They might be on the wall above the client's head. And this is so that the client doesn't get distracted by maybe counting the seconds, or doesn't feel the pressure that they're running out of time. Or especially when I think you're paying for counseling, sometimes you feel like, okay, I have 1 hour, I'm paying, let's say, £100 for this, I'm gonna say as much I can in this 1 hour, and you're counting the seconds. Okay, I have to say this and that. So I think it's actually really good that patients don't see the time, and the counselor, they usually will tell the patients about 5 minutes before they run out of their time that, we're coming to the end, let's summarize the points. but it's nothing really good for the patients to see constantly. So I hope you found this interesting, especially if you're considering doing counseling or just started doing the counseling. Just, have a look around and think, how well does your room fit into the description that I have shared with you? And also, how comfortable you feel in this room? Because you might be surprised that you actually can have a bit of a say in this. And if the sitting position you have right now is not comfortable, or you would like to maybe not have a table in front of you, just tell this to the counselor and see if that makes your sessions maybe more interactive, more open. And just be very honest with how you're feeling. Don't just accept things as they are. And there's no harm in asking a counselor, hey, can we just rearrange your room a little bit? I think I'll feel a bit safer if we don't stare at one another. So I hope you found this useful. So before we finish today, I wanted to share with you also one really cool small advice that I got from one of my fellow students. And I really liked that, especially how simple it was. So this is directed towards people who feel often anxious or might have anxiety attacks. So in moments like this, it's very easy to be completely overwhelmed with your emotions. You might feel completely alone and helpless. So here's something you can do to make you feel a bit less stressed. In the moments when you are actually feeling quite calm, make a small list of all the people that you can call when you need help. Now, this list might have only one person, it might have 10 people, it might have 100 people. They might be people from your work, they might be your close friends, they might be a family member. But just make that little list and put it at the back of the case of your phone. So something that you can actually see. You don't have to display the names. Obviously, it's up to you if you don't feel comfortable, but just have it visible. So in my case, it's transparent, so I can actually see that note. So the trick here is that whenever you feel really anxious, just look at that list, because sometimes in those moments we do forget that we have people around us that care about us. And this list is a visual representation that there are people you have there to help you. There are people you can call, and obviously if you need to call them, that list is with you all the time. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please continue to follow this channel and share your comments, and please take good care of yourself. Till next week. Bye bye.